Greetings and welcome to Informal Logic, Appeals to Authority. We're going to get right down to it here and start with first section here is our introduction. The appeals to authority. We hear this a lot as a common fallacy when we divert the attention of the argument to someone's alleged authority, and then that supposedly creates an assent between the other party that whatever premise is already settled. However, let's look at the definition here. The argument from expert opinion uses the opinion of a respected authority or expert on a subject as positive personal argumentation. Positive personal argumentation to support one's own side of an argument. Let's contrast it with ad hominem attacks. Ad hominem attacks undermine credibility, while argument from expert opinion cites a reliable authority. So, where one is in a negative personal argumentation, the appeal to authority is a positive personal argumentation. However, it is focused on the person, not on the argument at hand. So, again, these are ad hominem attacks undermine credibility, while argument from expert opinion or appeals to authority cite reliable authority. What is reliable? We'll get into that. Similarity to ad hominem. Both center on the internal position or credibility of a particular individual, whether it's positive or negative, that credibility. Difference from objective knowledge. Appeals to authority rely on personal sources rather than scientific evidence. And the general acceptance. The use of argument from expert opinion is a reasonable, if inherently defeasible, type of argument. And defeasible means it can be defeated by presenting new evidence, so it's something that is open to attack. Let's proceed. And if you haven't already done so, if you're in the room, please hit the like so we can get that notification out there, because it seems like it was rather thin. And as an added bonus, if you post, let's see here. Yes, if you post into the chat, you should get a little treat. Let's see if we can demonstrate here for you.
The tribe says, hit the like.
There you go. Okay, let's proceed. Reasonable appeals to authority. Legitimate form of obtaining advice when objective knowledge is unavailable or inconclusive. So it is legitimate form of obtaining advice, but it's not objective knowledge. It's when it's not available. There's a recognition of reasonable appeals to authority in law. Expert testimony, as we've heard a lot, expert witnesses, expert testimony is treated as important evidence in trials. Application in computer science. Expert systems are used across various domains. Not inherently fallacious. There is nothing wrong in principle with backing up your argument by appealing to an expert opinion. Of course, there has to be a reasonable appeal here. The potential for misuse. Authority-based arguments can become quite questionable when used to stifle disagreement unfairly. So the abuses of the appeals to authority is where it becomes fallacious. Let's proceed. The ad hominem versus the expert opinion. The comparison and similarities. So let's look on this side. The ad hominem attack. Negative use of personal argumentation to undermine or destroy credibility of a person in a critical discussion. Then there's the argument from expert opinion. This one uses the opinion of a respected authority as positive personal argumentation. So, and this one is to undermine or destroy credibility in the argument from expert opinion, it uses the opinion of a respected authority as a positive personal argument to support one's own side of an argument. The similarities are that both appeals to personal sources of opinion that center on the internal position or credibility of a particular individual as a reliable source of knowledge. Now, to contrast that with objective knowledge, both types, the ad hominem and the argument from expert opinion, can be contrasted with appeal to external or objective knowledge from scientific evidence, which comes from nature, not a personal source. So this is the difference. Objective knowledge is out there, and these types of personal knowledge are in there, in the head. And from there, let's proceed further down the legitimate use and misuse of authority. Let's look at this here. Now we're getting more into the meat of how it happens in our day-to-day lives. We have legitimate applications, such as in law, the expert testimony as important evidence in trials. In computer science, we have expert systems with applications across domains. This is where you definitely want authorities working on this stuff. And defeasible reasoning. It's reasonable when objective knowledge is unavailable. So, again, this is for the applications we use authority, but that still exists the potential misuse. Used to stifle disagreement unfairly. If it's deployed too aggressively to beat opponents into submission. And appeals to inflated respect or reverence for authority. So these are the misuses here. If it's being used, the appeal to authority, too aggressively and used to beat opponents into submission, that's a misuse. If it's used to stifle disagreement unfairly, and of course the appeals to inflated respect or reverence for authority. Of course, that leads us to the Milgram experiments, which I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with. That subjects administered to electrical shocks to learners when ordered by an experimenter thought to be a scientific authority. So the subjects administered electric shocks to learners. This is a quote here from the text. However, the learners were the participants, and they were supposed to be training, as that's what they were told by the scientific authorities. 60% of these subjects here administered the final 450-volt shock, which is supposedly demonstrating the deference to authority even when causing pain. So this is showing how powerful the misuse of appeals to authority can be when people believe that such as a scientific authority so much that they would administer not just pain but 450-volt shocks just because a scientific authority told them to. And we're on to John Locke's argumentum ad verecundiam, the meaning and the origin. So the argumentum ad verecundiam literally means the argument from modesty. First used by John Locke in an essay concerning human understanding in 1690. The purpose and function, a tactic to prevail on the assent of another person or to silence opposition by alleging the opinion of a third person with established authority and reputation. However, it says here, when men are established in any kind of dignity, it is thought a breach of modesty for others to derogate in any way from it and question the authority of men who are in possession of it. So when we say the argument from modesty, the argumentum ad verecundiam is saying that you should be assenting to those that have the knowledge or in possession of it, as it says here, the authority of men who are in possession of it. And it's a breach of modesty for others to derogate in any way from it. But the purpose and function here is a tactic to prevail on the assent of another person or to silence opposition by alleging the opinion of a third person with established authority and reputation. So, in a way, it's not all appeals to authority are fallacious. The fallacy occurs when the authority is used to suppress critical questioning or to prevail unfairly in discussion. So, it's a fine line between the argumentum ad verecundium and the appeal to authority left unchecked, so to speak. Milgram experiment details and reasonable appeals. So the experiment setup seems a little out of place here, but the subjects told they're testing learning behavior. The shocking results: 60% of subjects administered the final 450 volt shock. Ouch. So this is how this is all done here. They're testing subjects, saying that they're testing the learning behavior. And the subjects were going to be running this test on these people that were learning behaviors. They were asked to administer electric shocks to those that were learning. The ones that were, all of these people are actually in the experiment unwittingly to one extent or another. The shocks increase in severity with each mistake. So if the learner makes a mistake, the subject is supposed to shock them. The learner is actually an actor, faking discomfort though. However, the subject doesn't know this. He sees these guys acting out like they're getting shocked and probably hears all kinds of sparks. All right. The shocking results were that 60% of these subjects administered the final 450 volt shock. The results were later replicated by other psychologists.
Expert 587 says, I watched that experiment footage. Truly disturbing.
Yeah, indeed. And there's been a lot of takes on that one, and it is quite disturbing. All right, excellent. It seems like that's working well. If you all heard that, I hope you all heard that one, and let's continue on. If you could give me a confirmation that you did hear the audio of this comment here. And we're going to proceed here. Now, this demonstrated the deference to authority, and even when causing apparent pain to others. Terrible. Now, the reasonable appeal to authority. Now, although appeals to authority can be erroneous, some appeals can be reasonable and legitimate. For example, it's kind of a weak example here, but we could just go along with a hypothetical. If you have a toothache and you go to your dentist for advice, his professional opinion represents a reasonable appeal to authority when objective knowledge is unavailable or inconclusive. Excellent. Oakland Love, indeed. Hope that was coming through. Let me double check something here and see if that is indeed working. Let's do one of these real quick.
The tribe says, hit the like.
No, it's not coming through. Darn it. Give me a moment here, and let me fix this up if you may. And let's get this thing here working. Why was that not working? I think I see what's going on here. Give me just a moment.
Facetious Expert 587 says my comment came through as just now didn't. Facetious Expert 587 says no, yours just did.
And can you guys hear it? Because it seems like it's not coming through on my side here. Double check here. So watch our output. Yeah, it should be coming through. Let me do one more thing here. All right. Let's try this here. See if that works. All right.
Facetious Expert 587 says I hear them all but list V.
All right. Let's see here if I can fix that one more time. Just bear with me.
The tribe says, hit the like.
Yeah, it's not coming through the way it should. Let's see why. Kind of annoying when things like this happen, but it is a good idea to fix them Well, I get someone else here to... Oh, okay. I see what's wrong. This should be fixed very quickly. Alrighty. Check, check. Indeed, and now watch this. Let's see here. More time.
The crime says, hit the like.
And that should have worked. Okay, let's proceed. We'll edit that out. So the Milgram experiment details and the reasonable appeals. Reasonable appeal to authority. Although appeals to authority can be erroneous, some appeals can be reasonable and legitimate. For example, if you have a toothache and you go to your dentist for advice, his professional opinion represents a reasonable appeal to authority when objective knowledge is unavailable or inconclusive. So here's an example, a reasonable appeal to authority. The tooth is badly decayed, but not beyond repair. I propose to replace the decayed portion with a filling immediately. High pressure sales. Well, somewhat reasonable appeal. Let's just say that. See the types of authority now. We have administrative authority, a kind of right to exercise command over others through an invested position or office of power. Then there's a cognitive authority, a relationship between two individuals where one says carries weight or plausibility within a certain domain. So where what one says carries weight or plausibility, but only within a certain domain, that's cognitive authority. The distinction importance, confusing the two meanings. Oh, hang on a second. There we go. It doesn't read the, what's it called? I guess I could set the alert bell so it tells me when that happens. Let me see where that is. Text to speech. Yeah, there should be an alert bell too, but that's okay. I think we'll just have to keep note of it. Oh, there it is. Okay, now we got it all. Got the trifecta going here. Let's continue. So the importance of the distinguishing the two between an administrative authority and a cognitive authority. Confusing the two meanings may lead to exaggerated feelings that all authority is fallacious. An example, so confusing any kind. These are just some types here, administrative, cognitive, there's more. But confusing the meanings of any kind may lead to exaggerating feelings that all authority is fallacious. Here's an example. A physician certifying fitness for a driver license exercises both cognitive and administrative authority. So you get the doctor's note and you know that he's qualified and has the equipment to check the eyes, I guess, here. Fitness for driver license exercises. I guess that would be an eye doctor, perhaps. Let's proceed. Here's another example. The ship captain and the porcelain expert. The captain of a ship surveying wrecks in the South China Sea discovers a heap of antique porcelain in a submerged wreck and has it hauled aboard. It is blue and white Chinese porcelain that might be old and valuable. There's only one way to be sure. The captain calls in an expert, an authority on Chinese ceramics. The expert surveyed, finds, and pronounces, well, this looks like her opinion. Definitely 18th century, probably late Ming and traditional period Chinese porcelain. On this advice, the captain continues to probe the wreck for further treasure. So, getting that expert involved, he doesn't know for sure, but if that person says that that porcelain is very valuable and there could be more down there, it's worth the effort for the captain to continue to probe for further treasure. And we're on to the mother and daughter example. On a very cold day in northern Canada, Douglas Walton, the author of this book, is Canadian, by the way. On a very cold day in northern Canada, a mother runs outside when she is told that her daughter has her tongue stuck to a metal flagpole. The mother says, I told you 100 times not to put your fingers or your tongue on very cold metal. I told you that if you did, you would get stuck to it. Why did you put your tongue on the flagpole? The daughter says, I guess after she got her tongue off the pole, I wanted to see if it was true. Okay, so a reasonable authority was ignored, and that's why there's a danger in assuming that all appeals to authority are fallacious. Now we're on to argumentation scheme for appeal to expert opinion. So for our context, the expert consultation dialogue is a subspecies of knowledge elicitation dialogue. So let's break this down. Expert consultation. If you're having an expert consultation, that dialogue is a subspecies, a special type of the knowledge elicitation dialogue. So you're eliciting, you're getting knowledge out of the expert. The primary context, persuasion dialogue, where one party cites an expert to support their position. Secondary dialogue, implied knowledge elicitation dialogue between the proponent and the expert. The knowledge-based reasoning. The internal reasoning of expert systems draws from facts and rules. And the legitimate function. The argumentation based on expert sources is a species of plausible reasoning that shifts the burden of proof. So we see this argumentation scheme. So pay attention. We have the expert consultation is a subspecies of knowledge elicitation dialogue. So we're taking in the context of this appeal to expert opinion. There was a dialogue eliciting knowledge. Then there's a primary context. This is actually a persuasion dialogue where one party has to only cite the expert to support their position, presumably based on having that elicitation dialogue. Then there's a secondary dialogue, the implied knowledge elicitation dialogue between the proponent and the expert. So this is, again, presumed implied. Knowledge-based reasoning, then the internal reasoning of expert systems draws from facts and rules. So again, referring back to the expert consultation, the legitimate function, the argumentation based on expert sources is a species of plausible reasoning that shifts burden of proof. So again, this is not by proving something, by shifting the burden of proof to the opposing party to try to say that the expert is wrong now. So this is, if you follow along here, that's the scheme for the appeal to expert opinion, broken down into a logical context. And let's look at that formal structure of appeal to expert opinion. Again, we're studying informal logic, but it's all based on formal structures, the formal logic. So E is an expert in domain D. So E, the expert, is an expert in domain D. That's his course of expertise. E, the expert, asserts that A, some fact, is known to be true, or premise. A is within D, so the premise is within the expert's domain of knowledge. Therefore, A, this presumption or this premise may plausibly be taken to be true. So proposition has to be true or false. However, because we're using this expert and domain in this formal structure of logic, therefore, this is only plausible, not certain. So again, defeasible. And the critical questions now for the appeal to expert opinion. Let's find out if it is valid or not. The expertise, or true or not, I should say. So we have the expertise question. How credible is E as an expert source? Is he really an expert, or he just has the internet certificate saying he is? Field question. Is E an expert in the field that A is in? And A is the proposition. So is A the domain, the field, right? Is the domain of E. Is that within the field, the proposition, that within that domain of knowledge of the expert? That's the question. Opinion question. What did E assert, the expert, that implies A. So that elicitation of knowledge. What was it that E asserted that implies the proposition A? Then there's the trustworthiness question. Is he personally reliable as a source, or are they just quoting someone else? Is it hearsay? Consistency question. Is A, the proposition, consistent with what other experts assert? So, is this proposition considered true by other experts or just E? And then the backup evidence question. Is E's assertion based on evidence or is it strictly opinion? Now we have sub-questions for the expertise question. What degrees, professional qualification, or certifications does this person hold? That's one way of verifying. Can testimony and evaluations of colleagues or other experts be given to support his status, which is some level of validation? Does the expert cited have a record of experience in the field or technique being discussed? So his repute within that domain. What is this individual's previous record of predictions or successful accomplishments in his field? So again, does he have a demonstrable ability to predict properly for this domain? And can evidence of publications or other projects evaluated by other authorities be given? So they're applying to peer reviewed, but anything that would be part of their projects or portfolios to prove that they've had results before that can be demonstrated, documented, and corroborated. And on to the sub-questions for trustworthiness question. So first, is E biased? Is the expert biased? Is the expert honest? And 3, is the expert conscientious? Are they willing to do what's right? All right, and let's continue on. 3 common errors in citing expert opinions. Error 1, outside the field of experience. Citing an expert outside their field of experience. We see that quite often. Error 2, vague expert citation. Vague appeals to unnamed expert, some have said. Error 3, non-expert authority. Citing non-experts as authority. Okay, so same thing as finding just someone that's popular, perhaps. Halo effect and specialization problem. When expertise in one field is incorrectly transferred to another, experts may have limited knowledge outside their narrow domain. Incorrectly transferred to another. So there it is. Let's see example here. Einstein on economics. This alarming defense spending will lead to economic disaster. According to Einstein, heavy defense spending in a country is a sign of political instability that is not consistent with sound fiscal policies that can yield lasting financial recovery from a recession. Well, since Einstein said it, I guess that means that he knows about economics too. All right, so you see how that appeal to authority is misplaced. All right, let's go on to the next one. We get to the vague expert citation. According to the experts, corporal punishment has a traumatic effect on a child's later development. So parents should never spank a child under any circumstances. So vague expert, who says this? According to, the experts. That's Mr. and Mrs. the experts. All right, now we're on to comedian endorsing a soft drink. A famous comedian recommends a particular brand of soft drink on the basis that it contains no sugar and is therefore a good way to maintain a healthy diet and take off weight. Oh, it looks like it worked for this comedian here. Then again, I would say the best example of this is the clown. Why would anyone buy a hamburger from a clown? But I digress. Let's proceed. Evaluating appeals to expert opinion in written sources. So let's look at the limitations. In media sources, direct questioning of experts is not possible. So when you are making an appeal to an expert just by written word, there's no direct questioning, no cross-examination. Analysis approach. Use argumentation scheme with critical questions to evaluate the strength. So you don't want to stack the deck necessarily in your favor when you're using that type of a written source. And common issues. Articles often based on expert opinions without raising critical questions. So you've got to bring up the common issues. Documentation problems. Many appeals lack sufficient detail to give much support. So again, the vague references. And range equality. Appeals fall between highly plausible and deceptive, fallacious arguments. Whole range of quality of the appeals to experts, somewhere between highly plausible to deceptive, fallacious arguments. All right, and as we proceed, anyone new in here, please hit the like so we get the word out here and get more people to give some feedback. So let's take some opinions from the audience on this one here. We have an example here, the conflicting expert opinions on hepatitis C. Of course, this isn't medical advice or anything. This is strictly for the entertainment, educational purposes of this YouTube channel, not to be used misconstrued for anything health, personal, financial, tax, business, or law, legal, otherwise. Let's continue. Dr. Robert Haley, an internist and epidemiologist at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, believes the risk is substantial. So we're talking about Hep C. In a study published last year, he and a colleague tested 626 people for hepatitis C, then questioned them about different possible risk factors. Drug use was the strongest predictor, but tattoos were in the same league, causing a six-fold increase in risk. And because tattooing was more prevalent than drug use, the researchers concluded that it actually accounts for more cases. Yikes. All right, so what do you guys think about that way of looking at an argument? So this is an expert opinion on Hep C, and their proposition here, their conclusion I should say, is that tattoos account for more cases of Hep C than drug use. But he's basing it causing a six-fold increase in risk in a study published last year of 626 that he and a colleague tested. So, looks pretty authoritative, looks reasonable authority here. It's not hearsay. He was part of the study. Gives the numbers, quantities, plenty of documentation. Let's continue. Now here's an opposing expert opinion. In one CDC survey, researcher questioned patients with acute, newly acquired Hep C and found that they were no more likely than other people to sport fresh tattoos. In another study, researchers surveyed 8,000 Texas college kids and found no link between dyed skin and HCV positive blood tests, which I assume is hepatitis C virus or whatever. So now we have an opposing expert opinion. What do you guys think in the comment section there? Do you think that this study here is a better... Wrong one, sorry. Let's see here. Okay, we have Robert Haley. Tattoos were in the same league, causing a six-fold increase. Or are we with the CDC saying there's no link between the dyed skin and HCV over 8,000 Texas college kids? Now I see the big difference here is that these are newly acquired and acute, right? And on this one here, 626 people, tested them if they had it active, and asked about possible risk factors. So, which do you think here is more skewed? Which one seems more convincing? All right, in the meantime, we'll move on to the Beckel margarine advertisement. Many doctors and dietitians agree that important qualities of margarines are that they are low in saturated fat and are non-hydrogenated. These are essential qualities you'll find in Beckel, and that's important to know, because Beckel believes that with sufficient information and encouragement, you can make sensible dietary choices. So ask your doctor or dietitian about Beckel. If you choose by listening to that little voice inside yourself that's always right, you'll be reassured to know that many doctors and dietitians feel the same way. Wow. So that's an advertisement there. A lot of appeal to authority. I don't know how vague we would consider those, how much details we really get on that. Starting to drift away here. Let's continue here with expert testimony and legal argumentation. I'm still waiting to hear what you guys think about the previous one here with the CDC and and Mr. Haley. Let's see here. And the CDC study. Which do you think is more convincing, more persuasive, more correct as far as the logic goes within them? That's key right now to what we're trying to find, that fine line with those appeals to authority. All right, anyhow, let's proceed on here. On to the next slide. So we have the expert testimony and legal argumentation. There's a growth in the use. Most major trials now involve expert testimony. There's a historical standard. There's Fry versus United States, 1923. It required a general acceptance. Again, the word general is defeasible. Modern standard, the Daubert factors. There's testability, error rate, peer review. So again, we were looking at these qualities of the expert before. Testability, can it be tested what he's stating, or is it strictly opinion? The error rate has been wrong before, and peer review, is he in high repute with his peers? Then there's the battle of experts. Opposing lawyers often bring in experts with conflicting opinions, as we previously saw with the CDC and Dr. Haley. And we're on to the child abuse syndrome testimony. When trying accused child molesters, for example, many courts now permit psychiatrists to testify that the psychological problems of an alleged victim are evidence that abuse has in fact occurred. Wow. The notion that abused children develop characteristic syndromes can be useful to clinicians making diagnoses or prescribing treatment as caregivers. They are concerned primarily with the patient's current state of mind. Interesting here. So this is a testimony here. The psychological problems of an alleged victim are evidence that abuse has in fact occurred. The notion of these syndromes can be useful to clinicians making diagnoses or prescribing treatments. So we see here that they're, as caregivers, they are concerned primarily with the patient's current state of mind. So to see that there has been some type of abuse that has occurred with a result of current psychological problems needs that testimony with someone that is primarily concerned with the patient's current state of mind. So as we see this, again, this is how the structure works for that argument. How expert is the authority? This author likes to touch on some touchy subjects too. for example, so I'll say that. Nonetheless, just to bring them here for you for the clarity and to keep the concepts clear for what the author intended. Nonetheless, the varying levels of authority. Some experts are more authoritative on specific topics than others. Specialization question. Is the claimed area of expertise a recognized specialization or just an interest? So, are they just interested in it, or do they have a recognized specialization? The media problem. Press often quotes administrative heads rather than working researchers. So that's a big media problem there. And then, of course, the quote meisters, the media favorites who are accessible and quotable, but may not be the best experts. These are the ones that get the frequent airplay. And second opinions, important when experts disagree or contradict each other. So let's see another example here. The media's usual suspects. Round up the usual suspects. The editor or producer snarls as deadlines loom. Reflexively, a story involving feminism becomes a story quoting Gloria Steinem or Susan Brown Miller. Starve for a cogent quote on science? Any science. Get late astronomer Carl Sagan on the line. Good luck with that. None of this is necessarily a reflection on the usual suspects themselves. They are usually genuine resources in their fields. Still, the impression conveyed is of a world that contains only a handful of knowledgeable people. You have to go to that small few select handful of the usual suspects here. Always convenient and available for the media. Here's an example of a hair analysis testimony. On the basis of scientific intuition developed over 13 years of experience, an expert can use the comparison microscope to compare pigmentation granules from two hairs and determine with overwhelming probability that the two hairs came from the same person. Hence, one can arrive at a scientific conclusion that it is very unlikely the two hairs are not from the same person, even though the expert cannot put a probability number on it. So, as long as it's a disinterested hair analyst, and this guy's got over 13 years of experience, and I assume a good track record, and it's very unlikely, but he can't put a probability number on it. So you see how this appeal to authority can be whacked down by the opposing counsel. This person has to really bring up his strengths, like his success rate, peer review. Maybe he's published some documents on this, or can who knows. But again, you can see where it is a defeasible position. We're on to contradictory expert testimony. Irradiation and measurement of isotopes found in hair samples can be used to run computer tests to determine amounts of trace elements in hair. On the basis of these tests, it was concluded that it was very unlikely that the hair samples found at the scene of the crime matched those taken from the head of the accused man. So now they got some guy with a run computer tests as opposed to the guy with 13 years experience, and we're just assuming a good track record, right? And overwhelming probability, and can determine with it. Of course, he can't put a probability number on it. Whereas these guys have their fancy dancy computer tests that probably only put a number on it. It was very unlikely. So he was highly probable. They're very unlikely. So maybe they gave a number, but again, it's another defeasible argument. So let's see, interpreting what the expert said. Direct quotes are preferred. It's always better if the expert cited can be quoted directly. Aha. Translation problems. Experts use technical terms, though, that may be difficult to translate accurately. There's qualifications and exceptions. Real experts often make qualifications that may be overlooked. See, they make qualifications that may be overlooked. And the critical questions. Is the expert's pronouncement directly quoted? Have important qualifications been left out? Are there disagreements among cited authorities? Are technical terms explained clearly? So these are the critical questions. If you are preparing expert testimony, these are probably important things to look at. Make sure all the important qualifications are included. Note any disagreements among cited authorities so you can nip those in the bud before they're presented. And our technical terms explained clearly so you don't have those translation problems. Let's look more closely here. This is a cross-examination of a medical expert. Question here, Dr. X, in the study of psychiatry, isn't it more beneficial in formulating an opinion as to a person's state of mind on a particular or a given day to conduct an examination of him as soon thereafter as possible? So, opinion as to a person's state of mind on a particular or given day, it should be done as soon thereafter as possible. Answer from Dr. X, that is true. Question, so that if a person committed an act on a particular day, an examination conducted of him 3 days later or 2 weeks later would be more beneficial to the psychiatrist in evaluating and forming an opinion than an examination conducted 14 months later. Answer, it doesn't necessarily follow. No, it depends on the situation, the type of reaction, and the type of patient we are dealing with. So here we are on cross-examination. Let's see how well this doctor squirms out of this. Question, well, as a psychiatrist, you yourself, would you not prefer to examine a patient closer in point of time to the incident than 14 months later? Answer, I'd like to examine him 5 minutes after the crime. Question, so then you do agree that it is better to examine closer in point of time than at a remote period of time? Answer, I would agree that it would probably be better. Question, and is it not true that mental diseases and their manifestations are subject to change? Answer, very much so. See how this works? Right? So, a balanced view of argument from expert opinion. There's defeasible reasoning. Arguments that shift burden of proof. Defeasible reasoning. They don't prove, they shift burden of proof. Potential for bias. The experts can be subject to bias and prejudice. There's an open-ended nature. The critical questions lead to sub-questions, as we saw. So any kind of argument from expert opinion leads to more questions. And we don't have the icon here for the context-dependent evaluation. Depends on dialogue context, type, and the stage. So the evaluation depends on the context, the type, and the stage. Again, the fallacy identification. The ad verecundium fallacy occurs when critical questioning is suppressed. So remember, it's towards the modesty. You want to give the experts their due for where they can prove it in its reasonable authority. However, it becomes that fallacy when the critical questioning is suppressed. So all the questions we saw presented here, let's see here, where to go? Guess it was this one. Well, the critical questions, yes. These are the ones right here. Is the expert's pronouncement directly quoted? Have important qualifications been left out? Are there disagreements among cited authorities? Are technical terms explained clearly? So, as we move back to where we were here, the ad verecundium fallacy occurs when critical questioning is suppressed. And here's Lorenzo's oil case, another example. Lorenzo's oil. In this case, the 5-year-old son of Augusto and Michaela Odone had been diagnosed with a rare and incurable disease called ALD, adrenoleukodystrophy. The disease is caused by the body's inability to eliminate certain very long-chain fatty acids, VLCFAs, that eventually destroy myelin sheaths that cover the nerves in the brain. Physicians could not cure Lorenzo. And the movie depicts the struggles of the Odones, not themselves physicians, to try to do something about the deteriorating condition of their son. Eventually, the Odones discovered that a kind of oil, hence the title of the movie, did help their son. There's no medical advice here, but the medical experts consistently refused to even seriously discuss the possibility that this treatment was beneficial. They didn't want to. They refused to even seriously discuss a possibility because it did help their son now. So let's see here. Well, I guess that's it. Anyhow, the point is that the medical experts refused to even consider it.
Bill Thimmet 4426 says Lorenzo's Oil was a very sad movie.
Oh, perhaps. Yeah, I never saw it. But this is something where the appeals to authority is being used to suppress something that seemed valid, yet they abuse their authority to suppress the critical questioning because they refuse to even seriously discuss the possibility that the treatment was beneficial. So they're saying that because it's just anecdotal, that it's not something that can be proven through long studies and many participants over a long period of time. This is just one off the cuff anecdotal incident. It doesn't represent any kind of a pattern of use that would lead to the success, is what they're trying to claim here. Again, this is another fallacy that they try to use, but it's definitely a dilemma. But again, this is where when more people are informed with logic and the purpose of the informal logic when it comes to discussion and how we bring these formal structures into the dialogue, that we're able to arrive at the truth without being suppressed from the times we don't have all that objective knowledge present. As we saw before, there are examples where you don't have any kind of number to put on something and to quantify it. However, it still is true and valid. Let's proceed. So we're on to the conclusion here. Reasoned use of expert opinion can be legitimate and helpful. Appeals to authority are inherently weak, but valuable when used appropriately. The critical questioning is essential to proper evaluation. So there we go. When they're suppressed, it's not a proper evaluation of that appeal to authority. And fallacy occurs when expert opinion suppresses legitimate questioning. So, the appeals to authority require a balance between respect for expertise, that ad verecundium principle, and critical evaluation. So, the balance between respect for expertise and critical evaluation is key. With that takes us to the end of the presentation of informal logic, the appeals to authority. And if there's any other questions or comments, we'll follow up with that right now. I just want to thank everyone for being here that has attended so that we can explore this topic a little bit deeper. This is one of those parts of our liberal arts that seems to have been left behind in the educational system. And informal logic is where we bring that grammar, rhetoric, and logic together into a way that we use it in our day-to-day dialogues to solve problems and to achieve a better, higher purpose for everyone to live in a civilization that we can all thrive in. With that said, I'd like to thank you all once again, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.
Filthimus 4426 says, take care all. The tribe says, hit the like.